a little bit hot. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Adam for a closer look at Queen's studio albums. And in this episode, we'll be taking a look at Queen's third studio album, Sheer Heart Attack. It was released in November 1974, and we'll be comparing the formats between the compact disc, the vinyl record, the cassette tape, and of course the SACD. Now, the Sheer Heart Attack album has been remastered a few times over the years, being one of the earlier Queen albums. Obviously, the original mastering done by Roy Thomas Baker and Mike Stone in Queen was released in 1974 on vinyl record, and in 1991, a remaster of the album was done by Hollywood Records, and it was done by Kevin Metcalf in this case, which is a bit of a standout because usually they use Eddie Schreier, but in this case it was Kevin Metcalf. And it was reissued with an extra track, and in America only. And then in 1993 and 1994, the Digital Master Series came out, and Sheer Heart Attack was remastered by Kevin Metcalf in 1993. Obviously, it had a CD release in 1986, but that was using the original master. And Kevin Metcalf again did that as well. Then in 1998, Peter Mew at Abbey Road did a 24-bit master for the Crown Jewel set, and that got released as a standalone album in Japan, and then in 2001 it was reissued as the mini LP series, and then reissued again in 2004. And then, of course, in 2011, a part of the 40th anniversary, Bob Ludwig remastered the album for Island Records, and it was released in a 2-disc set and a single disc set, as well as the same year as an SACD. Now, I've got 2 analog sources here, cassette tape and vinyl record, and I've got 2 digital sources, CD and SACD, and I have got 4 different masterings to compare. But before we do that, let's talk about the sessions for this, which took place between July and October 1974. And this album, to be honest, was not really meant to be. It was made out of circumstance and not because they wanted to. Back in 1974, March, they just released Queen 2 and had planned to go on tour. And during the tour, Brian May fell ill with hepatitis. They blamed it on a dodgy needle. And he was hospitalized for a couple of months. So the band thought, well, we might as well start recording a new album, I guess, then, while he's getting better. And so early tracks were put down. The studios that were used was Trident Studios initially, studios in Wessex, or Wessex Studios, Air Sound Studios, and Rockfield Studios. So the album was kind of split over all those studios, and the 3 members of Queen started writing, and including John Deacon, thinking that Brian May probably wouldn't be joining, so they're going to need help. And a couple of months into the session, so this was probably around September-ish, Brian May started to rejoin and started to lay down his guitar solo and overdubs for what the band had already recorded, and fell ill again. Was hospitalized again during the recording of Sheer Heart Attack with an ulcer, ruptured. So he was out of action, and he honestly thought he was going to be kicked out of the band, to be honest. But the other members were like, yeah, we never thought of that, mate. They just waited for him to return, and the album was finally finished off and released. So it literally a Sheer Heart Attack album, blood, sweat and tears. It was produced by Queen and Roy Thomas Baker, and the mastering, the mixing was done by Mike Stone. I had one source say that it was mastered in LA, which that's the only time I've ever heard that, and I'm not sure if that's true. But anyway, what versions have I got to compare? Well, we've got the original pressing vinyl record from 1974. This is the first pressing. So very nice pressing. I've got to say that the The audio quality on this, in terms of, you know, is it a mint condition LP, or is it a completely, you know, banged up one? It's actually not mint, but near mint. It's a very clean, very good recording, considering its age. That's a way, hey, I'd say. So the original LP pressing for the record. For the cassette tape, we have the Kevin Metcalf remaster, the Digital Master series. So I don't know how different the Hollywood Records remaster that came out in 91 and the Digital Master series version would be if the same person did the mastering for both. I don't know. But the Hollywood Records, from what I've read, it was mastered in America, whereas the Digital Master series was done at Abbey Road. That's what we've got for the cassette tape. For the CD, we've got Peter Mew's 2001 issue, based off the Abbey Road 24-bit digital sessions. On CD. This was issued in Japan only. This is the 2001 version. And then, of course, on SACD, or a high-definition version of it, we have the SACD that Bob Ludwig did, and was released in 2011. So, let's go through it. Now, before I go through these albums, there's also going to be a surprise guest, you know, in this video. The album itself, this isn't obviously a review of the songs. This is a review of the sound fidelity that was on here. As a whole, from what I understand that the sessions contained, this was the very first time Queen had access to a 24-track mixing desk. So they could properly put together an album versus Queen 2, which was only done on 16 tracks. And you can really tell that, I think, it sounds very compacted. Whereas they had a lot more tracks to play with and a lot more room to put into the album. And I think it really does show. The consistency, especially on the vinyl LP, between both sides is totally there. There's 3 standout tracks in terms of their fidelity, and that is Misfire on side B, Bring Back That Leroy Brown, and She Makes Me. Those 3 tracks are the best quality, the best version, or, you know, the highest fidelity tracks on the entire album. Side A, let's get into it. Side A was, when I played at reference for my analog reference, it was out by only 7 decibels. So not too bad. This is what the inside looks like. Oh, that's what the back looks like. Sorry, forgot to show you. This is what the inside looks like. You got all the lyrics on there, and all the credits down here, and more lyrics on the back, like that. And then on the inside of the record, for anybody who cares, is the old EMI grey or brown, brown and red, sorry, logo. Very clean copy I've got. Very good. So side A, 7 decibels out, under reference, so I had to crank it up by 7 decibels. On side B, it was 8. So it was like 1 more decibel out. But in terms of sound fidelity on side A, I gotta say, this so far, out of the 3 Queen albums that they would have released, this is the best sounding one. It completely blows out of the water Queen and Queen 2 in terms of the fidelity of the instruments that's been recorded to the vinyl. So the way that they recorded the instruments, you hear everything. You hear the drum kit perfectly, every piece of it. You hear Freddie's vocals, the background vocals, piano, and they also had a few more instruments playing on this for the very first time. A jangle piano, and a couple more which I've completely... a double bass and a ukulele. And I gotta say, everything is clear. Brian's guitars, the mixing was done very well on this, I think. And their best sounding in terms of fidelity album to date, up to the Sheer Heart Attack album. On the first side, Brighton Rock starts off with a pre-recorded carousel segment, which, you know, you hear quite nicely. Brighton Rock itself doesn't have overpowering guitars, even though it is a guitar-led song. They're not like A Night at the Opera, Brian's cranked his up. They're as they should be. Like, they're not overbearing the vocals, but the vocals have an interesting, like, almost echo or spatial atmosphere within them. They kind of almost sound like they've been kind of filtered, or something's happened to them to make them sound oldie, you know, like an old 60s seaside holiday or something. It's kind of weird. Killer Queen probably has the best fidelity on its track on side A. Tenant Funster has this beautiful airiness to it within the vocals. Roger sings it, and it sounds like, you know, the drum kit, him singing, the guitar, minstreling, and whatever else you hear is kind of spaced out. There is like space between the instruments, very well placed between the left and the right. The spatial kind of separation is used to good effect, but that song has this airiness about, which is pretty cool. Flick of the Wrist, Lily of the Valley, they kind of sound very similar in terms of the recording. The low end bass is there on the vinyl, and the high end is crystal clear. There is no muddiness, no distortion, until you get to Now I'm Here. And towards the end of that track, just before it finishes, there is 2 choruses which I heard distortion on. And it's not the setup or my needle or anything like that. It's literally... so you've got the final 3 verses of the song before it fades out. The first 2 of those choruses have a distortion between the guitars and the background vocals. Only slight, but it is there. And then it goes away for the outro. But other than that, Now I'm Here sounds, you know, like it should, like I remember it. The bass is quite good, not like deep thrumping bass, but bass enough for you to hear Roger's kick drum through most of the songs, like very clearly. So yeah, separation of the instruments is fantastic. Background vocals, Freddie sometimes during, I think it's Now I'm Here, gets a little bit lost maybe between the him and the background vocals, but split second, very, you know, hardly anything. Side B, like I said, 8 decibels out, so I had to crank that up a little bit. This has a very interesting production on it. In the Lap of the Gods, Stone Cold Crazy have this airiness to it, you know, and it's really nice. And then Dear Friends sounds like it is just Brian with the piano. Freddie with the piano, but it's well recorded, you know. It's not like over, you know, bearing and you hear tape hiss and all that. I didn't actually remember hearing tape hiss as such, but I do remember hearing like an atmosphere between all the instrumentations. It's honestly very unique sound. It's kind of weird as well, because Queen 2, they put everything into that production, and it was too much for what they had in terms of the tracks and the equipment. They pushed it to its limit, and you can tell. Whereas on this one, they didn't put as much production in. They let things breathe. They had let things open up to hear them more clearly. So obviously they didn't put all the bells and whistles in like they did with Queen 2, but this album does really come off well because of that, and it has everything there allowed to breathe. The Misfire song, for John Deacon's first song, is really well, probably the best produced track in terms of its sound fidelity on this album. The use of stereo, the guitars, Freddie's vocals, background vocals, everything, even the electric guitars that come in at the end, very nice. She Makes Me is actually, I don't know, She Makes Me might be the standout for me. She Makes Me, up until the third album, is Brian's best song. It has this openness to it, and Brian slips in a bit of a recording of New York in there, like the atmosphere of New York. You hear police sirens, traffic, people walking, and it really does have this lovely spatialness to it. And Brian's singing is probably the best I've ever heard him sing. Like, he sings the song and it's really good, and then towards the end all of the New York sound comes in, before a nice little drum roll by Rog. And honestly, a really well produced and well mixed track. And then you've got Bring Back That Leroy Brown. That track just has got so much going on in it. If anything, Bring Back That Leroy Brown is a homage to Queen 2, trying to throw in all the bells and whistles. Evidently, it had 70 tracks of vocals that had to be condensed down. So a lot of work was put into Bring Back That Leroy Brown, and it kind of shows. It's very much like a barbershop quartet song, really nice track. But the sound fidelity is what we're talking about, and that is crystal clear between all the instruments, and there's a lot going on between the left and the right. Everything is phantom center up front until it needs to be in the left or right, but when it does split between the left and right, it is equally in the left and the right. Not one is overpowering the other. And then, of course, In the Lap of the Gods. Now, In the Lap of the Gods is very interesting, I'd say, because obviously they emulate this chorus chant at the end, and it is only just Brian, Freddie and Roger doing it, but they multi-track themselves and overdub it to make them sound like it's Earl's Court singing, or Wembley singing. It sounds like there's thousands, and it is a very open sort of sound. It sounds like it's coming from a venue that is large, and there are loads of people singing. The way they've recorded it, they've done a very good job. Probably in terms of their overdubs and their multi-track and their harmonies, that's probably their finest work. Some will say no, it was all on Queen 2, but to make you sound like you are, thousands of people when you're only 3, that beats Bohemian Rhapsody and any track on Queen 2, I'm afraid. But towards the end, or halfway through the chanting, because it starts to, In the Lap of the Gods could just go on for years. It's that type of, lyrical and melody that you could just loop it forever, And before the record scratch ending explosion, there is a tiny little bit of distortion that I heard, but I think it was intentional to make it sound like a large stadium chanting, where you would then get distortion because of the noise of the place. I do believe they either added it or made it distorted slightly, just very slightly, to make it sound bigger as well. It's not like, oh man, that's distorted. No. It's like, whoa, that's a lot of people, and the microphone can only take so much. That it makes it sound believable. The vinyl record, like I said, was a really nice listen to. Very pleasant. Once I changed from the reference level, as it was slight under. And I think the reason why I'm finding most of these vinyl records are under reference is because, most people probably have a graphic equalizer where they turn up certain frequencies, and it would then hit reference level. If I had a graphic equalizer, obviously I play this through my amp, which I think plays it flat, doesn't add equalization to it. So if I did add equalization, I dare say it would then hit reference. But that's probably why I find a lot of vinyls not hitting reference, because it's expected to be a graphic equalizer put in the mix as well. But yeah, that's the vinyl record. Now, the cassette tape is very interesting. There's the tape. Digital Master Series done by Kevin Metcalf. I expected almost to really enjoy this one because of previous, albums on this Digital Master series that have trumped the vinyl record. I fully expected this would have it all. There's the inlay card with the Digital Master series and other albums you get there. Unfortunately, this version of the album, does not trump the vinyl record. This is very different to the mastering and the mixing on the vinyl record. For starters, it was only 5 decibels under reference, so not as much as the vinyl record, but I did crank it up and everything had changed. Killer Queen was slightly louder than it was on the vinyl record. Like, the mixing or the mastering on that particular track stood out even more so than on the vinyl. A lot of Brian's guitars on Brighton Rock had been ramped up in terms of their volume. They were very hard and noticeable, to the point where I had to go back and recheck the vinyl to make sure I wasn't misremembering it, and they weren't that loud on the vinyl record. The tape is a very different mastering job. A lot of the tracks are done and there's something missing. Like, in terms of the bass, the kick drum is there, for the majority, you hear it, but when songs start to get like Now I'm Here, even Bring Back That Leroy Brown, In the Lap of the Gods, Roger's kick drum kind of gets lost in that mix, with everything else going on. Probably the limitation of the tape format. But the high ends are kind of there, but they seem not as high-end as on the vinyl, which could be the format, but I have a feeling also slight noise reduction was dampening. It does have a Dolby sign. I didn't instigate my Dolby C or B noise reduction system, so I have a feeling when this was recorded using Dolby noise reduction, it kind of took a little bit off the high end, because they're not as crystal clear with clarity like they are in the vinyl. They're there, but it sounds like it could be brighter, in their sounding. The midsection on this album is far better than the vinyl. Like, it has a lot more weight, the midsection. Like, Freddie's vocals, background vocals, and the other drum parts other than the kick drum of Roger's set have more weight than the vinyl. It's really weird. Background guitars, they kind of, or what are they called, like the chorus guitars or something, they have like more weight to it. It's a bit strange, but it does sound a bit too much sometimes. It sounds like it obviously not the same engineer mastering this than the vinyl record, and it does show. It's this, you feel like there's something missing, but you can't put your finger on it. I know what it is, and it gets worse from here on out. So that's the tape. The CD from Japan. This was mastered by Peter Mew at Abbey Road in 1998 for a 24-bit mastering job. This is the 2001 release, which reuses those original master recordings from 1998 and then kind of masters them down to CD for 2001. It's a replica exact of the original vinyl, so you've got the inlay there with the lyrics, and then you take out the elephant condom and you've got the EMI centerpiece there for the CD. Now, and there is also, your usual Japanese, piece in there as well. The reference level for the CD was only below -3 below reference. That is it. I only had to crank it up a little bit, right? But again, now we don't have any analog distortion in the way. We can hear everything crystal clear, and it is a lot more clearer than the tape. But the mastering is very similar to the tape in terms of Brian Rock's guitars are pumped again. Killer Queen is even louder on this one than the tape, which could be a format thing, but like everything has been changed. and something is missing. And basically, on the vinyl record, where I heard this airiness, this kind of space between all the instruments, which created this atmosphere, it's been sucked out of this one. So everything is cramped in that phantom center, and it's very dry sounding, and it's very compressed, and it's just a lot of rubbish, basically. This is far worse than the vinyl record, by far. But not as bad as the SACD. And that's because of the format. The SACD can capture more, and so you lose more. I have a feeling that when this was done, noise reduction was used. And I have a feeling that on the vinyl, that noise, or for lack of a better term, non-noise reduction that was probably used, helped create a atmosphere between the instruments, you know, helped create this sound of noise that helped open up the album. And that's all gone from this CD. So just everything sounds so different. Now, I will say everything sounds clear. Guitars, you know, Roger's drum kit, the bass you hear better on the CD than you do on the tape and possibly on the vinyl. But what you do hear is a changed sound. The fidelity of the sound, or the phonics, or the sonics, or however you want to say it, is totally different on this CD and the SACD to the analog. In this instance, where you were to say analog versus digital, in this instance, analog wins. Because even the SACD, where this format allows you to clearly hear everything, and you do. You hear everything that is on that master tape, and you hear what is missing from that master tape. This space of airiness between all the instruments has been taken away. You know, let's have a look at these liner notes, because I think it gives a good hint of an idea as to what's happened. It says this 2011 version has been meticulously recreated using the finest modern analog and digital technology from the original first generation master mixes. Now, that vinyl record would have come from a first generation master mix, just the same. But there would have been digital technology, noise reduction, compression, which would have altered the internal sound of the album, and it doesn't sound good for it. Now, like I said, you hear everything clearly, more clearly more clearly on the SACD than the CD version. The piano jangle, the Rogers drum kits, Freddie's background vocals, every instrument, every sound is much more clearer on the SACD versus the CD. But it's also, you're missing all that extra sound on both versions, which is more noticeable on the SACD. It just doesn't sound like it did on the vinyl. And I don't think it's the format. I think they've removed, without knowing it, the soul of this album on SACD and CD. Now, I had a theory as to what was going on here. I thought, well, maybe it's just because these can capture more of the album, and so it's actually the vinyl that's lacking, you know, or it's the preamp analog warmth that's being added, you know, which is missing from here. And so to confirm my suspicions, I went, now like I said, I have got the CDs, like the original CDs. These are the digital master on CD, and these are like I used to have all the digital master series on CD, and you know I gave when in 2011 when the Hollywood Universal versions came out, I gave the CDs and the cases to my mom, but retained all the artworks. And so when I had a look at my sheer heart attack artwork here, I noticed, hang on a second, this isn't the digital remaster version. Where's the information here for the digital remaster series? And I look and I think, oh my gosh, this is the original 1986 release. That's why. You can tell it's the original 1986 release because three things. One, I don't know if you'll see this, but it says made in Germany down here. Two, it says AAD there. And on the inside, it has an explanation to what compact disc is and how mastering is done, instead of having that digital master series artwork. Now, every CD I've ever owned, I've backed up on the PC. So I do have a ISO file of this album from when I had the CD, which I'd given to my mom. I could easily go get it back. I'd probably just have to burn her a copy so she had it still. But I basically was able to burn myself from my original backup a version of the original CD release from 1986. And when I popped this in, this is the special guest, by the way. When I popped this in, the reference level for digital, forget it. It needed to use the analog reference, which is 10 decibels higher. And even then, it was like 1 decibel out. So this was perfect, almost. Well, not perfect, but 1 decibel out for analog reference, which is about 40% on my volume slider. Whereas digital reference, when I do listen to CDs and SACDs, I have to turn it down by 10 decibels to make it the same volume as the vinyl and the tape. So I'm listening to them all at the same volume. And I know it's the same volume because on my phone I have a decibel meter and I make sure that it hits between 50 and 60 decibels. And so I know I'm listening to all these formats at the same volume. This required me to use the analog reference on the CD, meaning that this is the original analog, like vinyl master, that was used on this CD. There is no normalization, there is no compression. It is what the vinyl is on a CD. And I gotta say, everything I heard on that vinyl is on this CD. This and the vinyl is by far the best way to listen to this album. Forget your Hollywood Records remaster, your Digital Master Series remaster, the Bob Ludwig, 40th anniversary remaster. They are all wank compared to this. This album is such a joy to listen to, either on the original vinyl, and don't get those, 2015 studio versions. They will suffer the same fate as the CD and SACD. The original CD and the original vinyl, they both have this sound within the album that makes the album bigger, that makes the clarity and separation between the instruments, heard, and makes you hear the instrumentation better. The vocals really do shoot left to right better and more so than they do on those other remastered formats and versions. There is this there is this lovely airiness to Brian's vocals and the song itself, and it sounds so big. And then towards the end, you really do think you're sitting in New York in a flat listening to Brian May sing to you. The atmosphere of the New York soundscape coming in as the song closes out, and that roll of the drum, which sounds so bloody warm and open, is all sucked dry on these other formats. It loses all of that. In fact, the New York atmosphere sounds so weird on these versions. It doesn't have the openness that it does on these versions. On this, it just sounds like they've used filters to remove tape hiss or noise, which has changed the song's soul. Hands down, these are the best versions. The original CD from 1986 and the original LP from 1974. Let me know your thoughts. Which one do you prefer to listen to? Yes, you hear things clearly on the remasters, but it doesn't have the same sound. The soul of the album is gone. It's on its deathbed, being pumped full of steroids. Whereas the original vinyl, the original CD release, they have the original sound of Sheer Heart Attack, which no other version of the album has, sadly. So that was the, like, obviously the vinyl is the way Queen want you to hear this album. That's what they released, and they were happy with the mastering, the mixing, the recording. This was like their first album that they're actually satisfied with fully, and they did a good job on it. You know, as haphazard or maybe rushed, maybe as it was, it's a really nice album. It's like one that I could listen to again and again and again and still enjoy it, and I'll probably whack on the headphones and listen to it while I'm editing this. But let me know your thoughts. Which album version of Sheer Heart Attack do you have? Which one do you prefer to listen to, and which one do you want to go and get? And thanks for watching and listen to my drivel about Sheer Heart Attack. In the next episode, we will be doing what I feel is almost a twin to this album, and that is News of the World, Queen's 1977 album, which had a very basic production and a very different production, like Sheer Heart Attack had from its predecessor. News of the World has a very different approach from its predecessor, and in the next episode we'll be taking a look at all the formats for that album. Take care, and I'll see you next time, guys. Bye bye.